we've done more unwrapping of what was in the boxes, and we wanted to just talk to you more about some of the stuff we found. So I know you've already told me that you didn't put anything in there that you remember, but I just wondered if, over the last couple of days, if you've thought of more, or if you remembered anything else.
No, I haven't.
Was there anything that you put in the bag other than the child? You said that when the baby was born, that you didn't want it to cry.
There's more. Hey, I'm sorry. I have hit every one of them.
Do you think all 4 of these babies were alive when they were born?
I think it was.
This woman gave birth to and murdered 6 babies over the span of a decade, hiding their tiny bodies in cardboard boxes in her garage like discarded trash. Her name is Megan Huntsman, and what she did will absolutely shock you. Her husband was cleaning out their garage after getting released from prison, moving boxes around, trying to get a fresh start. And that's when he found them, the decomposed remains of over half a dozen infants, carefully wrapped in plastic bags and stored like some twisted keepsakes.
Pleasant Grove Police.
Oh, yes, ma'am. Can I have an officer come to this address?
And your name?
My name's Darren West. I just found something in my garage. I think it's a miscarriage.
Can you be more specific? What do you mean by a miscarriage you found?
I have no idea. Just please send an officer up here.
It sounds like you may need medical.
It's been wrapped up in a plastic bag and it stinks.
Okay, what is it?
That 911 call from Pleasant Grove, Utah on April 12, 2014 would expose one of the most horrifying cases of serial infanticide in American history. But how does a woman murder 6 of her own newborn children without anyone, not even her husband, knowing what she's doing? And more importantly, how many more victims might there be that we'll never know about? The story I'm about to tell you is going to make you question everything you think you know about human nature, maternal instinct, and the lengths people will go to hide their darkest secrets. Because this isn't just about one woman who lost her mind and did something terrible. This is about a systematic, calculated pattern of murder that lasted for 10 years, committed by someone who appeared completely normal to everyone around her. Megan Huntsman grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah, in what seemed like a typical Mormon household. From everything I can tell from court records and interviews with people who knew her, her childhood was pretty normal, nothing that would suggest she'd become capable of such unthinkable acts. She attended church regularly, did well in school, and seemed to be just another kid growing up in the conservative religious community that defines so much of Utah's culture. That is, until she hit high school and met a boy who would change the entire trajectory of her life in ways that no one could have predicted at the time. His name was Darren West, and he was trouble with a capital T. Older than Megan, rebellious, already experimenting with drugs, and living the kind of life that would have horrified her parents, he was everything her religious upbringing had warned her about. But you know how it is with teenage girls and bad boys. The attraction was instant and intense, the kind of dangerous romance that feels like destiny when you're 17, but looks like a disaster when you're looking back years later. Darren didn't waste any time. As soon as Megan graduated high school, he proposed. They got married when she was just 18 years old, barely out of her childhood, and completely unprepared for what married life would bring. And that's when Megan started displaying behavior that, looking back now, should have been a massive red flag to everyone around her. She got pregnant almost immediately after their wedding, but here's the thing that makes absolutely no sense. Even now, even knowing everything we know about what came later, she kept it a complete secret. Not from just her friends or her family, but from Darren too. Her own husband, the father of the baby she was carrying, had no idea she was pregnant until she was literally 9 months along and about to give birth. Think about that for a second. How do you hide a pregnancy from the person you sleep next to every single night? How do you keep that kind of secret for 9 months? How do you go through morning sickness, doctor's appointments, buying maternity clothes, feeling the baby kick and move inside you, and never once tell the person who's supposed to be your closest companion in life? And more importantly, why would you want to? Megan gave birth to their first daughter completely alone in their house. She went through labor and delivery without any medical assistance, without anyone there to help her if something went wrong, without even telling Darren what was happening until after the baby was born. Only after the baby was born did everyone else find out about her existence. Friends and family were shocked, confused, asking the obvious questions. How could you not know your daughter-in-law was pregnant? How could you not notice the signs? But Megan just shrugged it off, saying she was a private person who didn't like making a big deal about things. She claimed she wanted to keep the pregnancy quiet until she was sure everything was okay with the baby. Red flag number 1, right there. But nobody recognized it at the time, because who would have imagined what was really going on in Megan's mind? But it didn't stop. Megan got pregnant again, and once again, she hid it from everyone. Even Darren, who you'd think would be watching for signs after the first surprise, had no idea his wife was carrying their second child until after she gave birth. This time, people were more suspicious. This time, there were questions about whether this behavior was normal or healthy. But Megan had her explanations ready. She was just private. She didn't like attention. She wanted to be sure everything was okay before she got everyone's hopes up. And somehow, people bought it. Somehow, her ability to convince people that this bizarre behavior was just a personality quirk allowed her to continue doing it. I mean, what kind of person does this? What kind of mindset allows someone to carry a baby for 9 months and not tell a single soul? What kind of psychological makeup creates someone who sees pregnancy, something that most women want to share and celebrate, as something to hide and conceal? Looking back now, knowing what we know, this behavior wasn't just weird, it was practice. She was perfecting the art of concealed pregnancy, and she was going to need that skill for something far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. Then something happened that would set the stage for the absolute horror that was about to unfold. Both Megan and Darren got hooked on methamphetamine, crystal meth, that devastating drug that destroys everything it touches, that turns normal people into hollow shells of themselves, that makes them capable of things they never would have considered when they were sober. The addiction hit them like a freight train. Within months, both of them lost their jobs because they couldn't function anymore. They were spending hundreds of dollars every single day just to get their next fix, money they didn't have, money that should have been going toward food and clothes and diapers for their 2 little daughters. Their 2 little daughters? They were being neglected while mommy and daddy chased their high. These innocent children were living in a house where addiction had taken priority over everything else, their safety, their well-being, their basic needs. The house that should have been filled with children's laughter became a place where addiction ruled supreme, where 2 little girls learned to fend for themselves while their parents spiraled deeper and deeper into drug-fueled madness. Neighbors would later tell investigators that they noticed changes in the family during this time. The house wasn't as well maintained as it used to be. The children seemed less supervised. There were strange comings and goings at odd hours. But nobody thought to call Child Protective Services. Nobody realized that 2 innocent little girls were trapped in a home where their parents were becoming something less than human.
Quite frankly, I'm still in a state of shock. We were wondering what the heck is going on.
Yeah, we were worried about her because we could see that she was not looking in good health. And we were worried about the children that lived there with her. Her 3 daughters lived there.
She always looked kind of slim. To have this many babies full term, it's like, where were they?
And then Megan got pregnant for the 3rd time. But this pregnancy was different. This time, she made a decision that defies every natural instinct we associate with motherhood, every biological imperative that's supposed to protect children, every moral principle that separates civilized human beings from monsters. She decided she didn't want this baby. Not that she couldn't take care of it, not that she wanted to give it up for adoption, she didn't want it to exist at all. Following her now established pattern, Megan kept this 3rd pregnancy completely secret. But this time, the secrecy wasn't just about being private or not wanting attention. This time, the secrecy was about hiding something much darker, something that would haunt everyone who learned about it for the rest of their lives. When the time came to give birth, Megan went into the bathroom of their home and delivered the baby alone. A healthy, living, breathing infant came into this world, probably crying, as all newborns do, probably looking around with those unfocused eyes that are still learning to see. For a few precious moments, this child was alive, was breathing, was experiencing the first sensations of being human. And then Megan Huntsman became a murderer. She pressed down on her newborn baby's neck, applying pressure until the tiny life she had just brought into the world stopped breathing. She watched as the baby's struggles became weaker and weaker until they stopped altogether. She held her own child while the life drained out of its little body, and she didn't stop until she was sure it was dead. Then she wrapped the small body in towels and trash bags, put everything in a cardboard box, and stored it in their garage like it was old Christmas decorations or outgrown clothes. Then she walked back into her house and continued living her life like absolutely nothing had happened. Let me ask you something. How does someone do that? How do you murder your own child and then just go make dinner? How do you look at your other children, your living daughters, and pretend you're a normal mother when you've just committed the most unnatural act imaginable? How do you sleep in the same bed with your husband and make conversation about your day when you've just killed his child and hidden the body in your garage? But here's what's even more disturbing. This wasn't a one-time thing. This wasn't a moment of desperation or drug-fueled madness that she immediately regretted. This was the beginning of a pattern that would repeat itself over and over again for the next several years. Between the years 1996 and 2006, while she was deep in her methamphetamine addiction, Megan Huntsman got pregnant at least 8 times. 8 times! Think about that number for a moment. Most families would be thrilled to have 8 children. 8 children means Christmas mornings filled with laughter, birthday parties, school plays, soccer games, family vacations, all the memories that make life worth living. But out of those 8 pregnancies, Megan Huntsman murdered 6 newborn babies, suffered 1 stillbirth, and allowed 1 child to live. 6 babies. 6 innocent lives that came into this world only to be immediately snuffed out by the very person who should have protected them above all else. 6 children who never got to take their first breath of free air, never got to feel sunlight on their faces, never got to experience love or joy or any of the things that make being human meaningful. The method was always similar. Secret pregnancy, where she used her now perfected techniques to hide her condition from everyone around her. Solitary birth in the bathroom of their home, where she delivered each baby alone without any medical assistance. Immediate murder, usually by pressing her thumbs against the baby's throat until they stopped breathing, sometimes by wrapping something around their neck. Then careful wrapping and storage in the garage. She developed a system, a routine for murder that she followed with the precision of someone going through a familiar checklist. She knew exactly how much pressure to apply, how long to maintain it, how to be sure the baby was dead. She knew how to wrap the bodies so they wouldn't leak or smell. She knew where in the garage to store them so they wouldn't be discovered accidentally. Can you imagine the psychological state someone has to be in to do this not once, not twice, but 6 times? We're talking about a woman who could feel these babies moving inside her for months, who went through the physical and emotional experience of pregnancy and labor, who looked into the eyes of her newborn children and then deliberately ended their lives. Every single one of these babies was born alive and healthy. There was nothing wrong with them. They weren't suffering from birth defects or medical conditions that made their deaths inevitable. They were perfect, normal babies who could have grown up to have full, happy lives if their mother had made different choices. But instead, their first and last experience of life was being murdered by the person who brought them into the world. The one baby who survived during this killing spree, her 3rd surviving daughter, lived for one reason only. Too many people knew about the pregnancy. Megan had been unable to keep this particular pregnancy secret like she had with all the others. Maybe she was showing more than usual, maybe people were more observant, maybe she was less careful about hiding the signs. But whatever the reason, she found herself in a position where she couldn't make the baby disappear without raising suspicions. Think about that for a moment. This child is alive today only because witnesses existed to her existence. She's alive because her mother couldn't murder her without being caught, not because her mother felt any maternal love or protective instinct. How do you process that as a human being? How do you live with the knowledge that your mother would have murdered you if she could have gotten away with it? This surviving daughter grew up in the same house where 6 of her siblings were murdered in the garage. She played in that house, had friends over to that house, lived her childhood just yards away from the bodies of children who should have been her brothers and sisters. She had no idea that her mother was a serial killer, no idea that her family's garage was essentially a tomb. While Megan was busy murdering babies and storing them in the garage, Darren's involvement with methamphetamine was evolving from simple addiction to something much more serious. He wasn't just using the drug anymore, he was making it and selling it, turning their family home into the center of a criminal enterprise that would eventually attract the attention of federal law enforcement agencies. Think Breaking Bad, but with dead babies hidden in the garage. The house became a laboratory where Darren manufactured methamphetamine using dangerous chemicals and processes that could have exploded at any time, killing not just him, but everyone in the house. There were drug dealers coming and going at all hours, bringing with them the violence and chaos that always accompanies the drug trade. The children were exposed to toxic fumes from the manufacturing process, dangerous criminals who had no concern for their welfare, and parents who were so consumed with drugs and criminal activity that they had essentially abandoned their responsibility to provide a safe home. In 2006, the DEA finally caught up with Darren. They raided the house, arrested him for manufacturing and dealing methamphetamine, and sentenced him to 12 years in federal prison. And here's where the story takes an even more disturbing turn. During their arrest and search of the property, DEA agents conducted what they called a massive and thorough search of the home and property. They found the drug lab, they found the chemicals and equipment used for manufacturing, they found scales, packaging materials, and large amounts of cash. They found evidence of distribution and sales. They found everything they needed to put Darren away for over a decade. But somehow, they completely missed 7 dead babies stored in the garage. How does that happen? How do federal agents, trained investigators who are supposed to be experts at finding hidden evidence, conduct a thorough search and miss 7 decomposing infants? Were they just not thorough enough, or were the bodies hidden so well that even trained professionals couldn't find them? Did they not search the garage carefully enough? Were the boxes containing the remains mixed in with so many other boxes that they didn't seem significant? Either way, this massive oversight allowed Megan's crimes to remain hidden for another 8 years. 8 years during which those babies remained in that garage. 8 years during which Megan continued to live with the knowledge of what she had done. 8 years during which the truth could have come out, but didn't. When Darren went to prison, 2 significant things happened in Megan's life. First, she got sober because her primary drug supplier was now behind bars. Without Darren around to provide her with methamphetamine, she was forced to confront her addiction and begin the difficult process of getting clean. Second, and more importantly for the unborn children of the world, she wasn't getting pregnant anymore. No more pregnancies meant no more dead babies. For the first time in years, the garage remained silent. Darren's parents owned the house where the family had been living, and they made Megan a deal that seemed reasonable under the circumstances. She could continue living there with her 3 daughters as long as she remained faithful to Darren while he served his time. It seemed like a fair arrangement. Keep the family together, give the kids stability and continuity in their lives, and maintain some sense of normalcy while Dad was locked up. For a while, it worked. Megan stayed clean, focused on raising her surviving children, and seemed to be building some kind of normal life. Her daughters were able to stay in the same school district, keep the same friends, and maintain some stability during what was already a difficult time in their lives. Neighbors noticed that the house was better maintained, that the children seemed happier and healthier, that the chaos and criminal activity that had defined the previous years was gone. But in 2011, 5 years after Darren went to prison, the arrangement fell apart in a way that would set in motion the events that finally exposed Megan's crimes. Megan had been having an affair with a man named Jimmy. She hadn't just violated her agreement with Darren's parents, she had completely betrayed the trust of the people who had provided her with a home when she had nowhere else to go, who had allowed her to keep her children in a stable environment, who had given her a chance to rebuild her life after the disaster of her addiction and her husband's imprisonment. The consequences were immediate and severe. Darren's parents kicked her out of the house, and Megan was forced to move in with her new boyfriend. After years of stability, her daughters once again found their lives turned upside down by their mother's choices. And wouldn't you know it, she got pregnant again. This time, though, something was different. For the first time in her adult life, Megan didn't keep the pregnancy secret. She told people about this baby right from the beginning, which was a complete departure from her established pattern of concealment. Friends and family members knew she was expecting, saw her during her pregnancy, and were prepared to welcome another child into the world. But then she claimed she lost the baby. A miscarriage, she said, a tragic but not uncommon end to what had seemed like a normal pregnancy. The only problem? There's no medical record of this miscarriage ever happening. Now, I'm not accusing her of anything, because there's no evidence, and miscarriages can happen without medical intervention or documentation. But I'll tell you what I always say, the best predictor of someone's future behavior is their past behavior. And Megan's past behavior was murdering babies and lying about it. So when she claims she had a miscarriage but there's no medical evidence to support that claim, when this alleged miscarriage happened during a time when her life was in chaos and she was dealing with major stress and upheaval, when this would have been the 8th or 9th pregnancy for a woman who had already murdered 6 babies, well, you start to wonder what really happened to that child. Meanwhile, Darren's 3 daughters, now 21, 20, and 14 years old, were still living in the family home with their aunt taking care of them. The house where their mother had committed unspeakable crimes, where 7 dead babies were stored in boxes in the garage, had become their refuge while their parents' lives fell apart around them. These young women were trying to build normal lives, despite the chaos that had defined their childhood. The oldest 2 were probably trying to figure out college and careers and relationships, normal young adult concerns. The youngest was still in high school, trying to navigate adolescence while dealing with having a father in prison and a mother who had abandoned them. None of them had any idea that just yards away from where they slept and ate and lived their daily lives, the remains of their murdered siblings were waiting in the darkness of the garage. In 2014, after serving 8 years of his 12-year sentence, Darren was granted early release for good behavior. He came back to the house he had left nearly a decade earlier, ready to start fresh and rebuild his relationship with his daughters. He was in his 40s now, probably feeling like he had lost the best years of his life to addiction and imprisonment, but determined to make the most of whatever time he had left. One of the first things he decided to do was clean out the garage. After 8 years of accumulation, the space was cluttered with boxes and belongings that needed sorting. His daughters had been using it for storage while he was gone, and it was time to organize, to clear out the old, and make room for a new beginning. It was probably a symbolic act as much as a practical one. Clean out the garage, clean out the past, start fresh. Make space for new memories, new experiences, a new chapter in his relationship with his children. As he worked through the boxes, moving things around and deciding what to keep and what to throw away, his hands fell on a small white cardboard box that seemed different from the others. It was carefully wrapped in duct tape and plastic, as if someone had taken great care to seal it completely. It was heavier than it looked, and when he moved it, there was something inside that shifted in a way that didn't sound like typical storage items. Something about the way it was packaged struck him odd. Why would someone wrap a box so thoroughly? What could be inside that needed such careful preservation? And why was it hidden back here among all the other storage items? When he peeled back the layers of duct tape and plastic, when he opened that box and saw what was inside, Darren West's life changed forever. Inside was the decomposed remains of a baby. His first instinct wasn't to call the police. His first instinct was to call Megan. Maybe she could explain this. Maybe there was some reasonable explanation for why a dead baby was stored in their garage. Maybe it was some kind of tragic miscarriage that she had been too traumatized to deal with properly. Maybe there was a reason that made sense, a reason that didn't involve the horror that was starting to form in his mind. But when she answered the phone and he told her what he had found, her reaction told him everything he needed to know. She had a complete panic attack on the phone. Not the reaction of someone who was confused or surprised or trying to figure out what he was talking about. This was the reaction of someone who had been caught, someone who knew exactly what he had found because she was the one who had put it there. The kind of reaction that only comes from being caught in something you've been hiding for years. There was no confusion, no shock, no "what are you talking about?" Just immediate, overwhelming panic, the sound of someone's carefully constructed world crashing down around them. That's when Darren knew his wife was responsible for what he had found, and if there was one dead baby in the garage, there might be more. With his hands shaking and his mind reeling from what he had discovered, with the horrible realization starting to sink in that the woman he had loved and married was capable of unthinkable evil, Darren West made the phone call that would expose one of the most horrific crimes in American history.
Pleasant Grove Police.
Oh, yes, ma'am. Can I have an officer come to this address?
And your name?
My name's Darren West. I just found something in my garage. I think it's a miscarriage.
Can you be more specific? What do you mean by a miscarriage you found?
I have no idea. Just please send an officer up here.
It sounds like you may need medical.
It's been wrapped up in a plastic bag that stinks.
Okay, what is it?
You can hear the confusion and horror in his voice as he tries to explain what he's found. How do you tell someone that you've discovered a dead baby in your garage? How do you find the words for something like that? When Pleasant Grove police officers arrived at the house on April 12, 2014, they expected to find one tragic discovery, probably the remains of a miscarried baby that someone had been unable to dispose of properly due to grief or trauma. What they actually found was beyond their worst nightmares. 7 dead babies. 7 cardboard boxes, each containing the carefully wrapped remains of an infant. 7 lives that had been snuffed out by the very person who brought them into the world, then stored like discarded possessions in the family garage. Detective Dan Beckstrom, who had been with the Pleasant Grove Police Department for years and thought he had seen everything the job could throw at him, would later say this case was unlike anything in his career. The systematic nature of the crimes, the careful concealment, the sheer number of victims, the fact that they had been stored for so many years, it challenged everything he thought he knew about criminal behavior and human nature. How do you investigate something like this? How do you process a crime scene that contains the remains of 6 murdered infants? How do you maintain your professional composure when you're looking at evidence of acts that defy every moral principle you believe in? The crime scene investigation took hours. Each box had to be carefully photographed and cataloged. The remains had to be removed and sent for forensic examination. The garage had to be searched for additional evidence. The entire house had to be processed as a potential crime scene. And all the while, Darren's 3 daughters had to come to terms with the fact that their mother was a serial killer who had murdered 6 of their siblings and stored their bodies just yards from where they had lived their daily lives for years. When police arrested Megan Huntsman and brought her in for questioning, she didn't try to deny what she had done. She didn't claim innocence or try to blame someone else or pretend she didn't know what they were talking about. She made a full confession that revealed the horrifying details of her crimes with a matter-of-fact tone that chilled everyone who heard it. But here's what's even more disturbing. When they asked her exactly how many babies she had killed, Megan said she had lost count. Lost count? Like she was trying to remember how many grocery store trips she had made, not how many children she had murdered. She told investigators that she was so high on methamphetamine during that time period that much of it was just a blur. She couldn't remember exactly how many babies there had been, but she thought there might have been 8 or 9 in the garage instead of the 7 they found. 8 or 9. That means there could be more victims out there, more babies that Megan murdered and disposed of in other locations because she was so high she forgot where she put them. More children whose bodies were never found, never given proper burials, never mourned or remembered except as gaps in a drug-addled killer's memory. When asked about her motive for killing 6 babies, at least 6 babies, Megan said she just couldn't take care of them. But here's what makes that explanation completely insane. Utah has safe haven laws. She could have taken any of those babies to a hospital, a fire station, or any designated safe haven location and surrendered them without any legal consequences whatsoever. She could have given those babies life. She could have given them to families who desperately wanted children, who would have loved them and raised them and given them everything they needed to have happy, successful lives. Instead, she chose murder. 6 families could have been completed by those children. 6 babies could have grown up to be doctors, teachers, artists, parents, whatever they wanted to be. 6 lives full of potential and possibility were ended before they even really began. Megan Huntsman was charged with 6 counts of aggravated murder, Utah's most serious criminal charge. Each count carried the possibility of life in prison, and given the systematic nature of her crimes, prosecutors were prepared to seek the maximum penalty allowed by law. But Megan surprised everyone by deciding to plead guilty to all charges. She wasn't going to fight it, wasn't going to put her surviving children through the trauma of a trial, wasn't going to force the community to relive every horrific detail in open court. On February 12, 2015, she stood before Judge Darrell McDade and formally entered her guilty plea. During the sentencing hearing, Judge McDade made a statement that captured what everyone in that courtroom was feeling. "I really thought I had seen it all until this case." Think about that. A judge who has spent years dealing with the worst of human behavior, who has seen murder and rape and child abuse and every other terrible crime you can imagine, said he had never seen anything like what Megan Huntsman had done. On April 20, 2015, Megan Huntsman was sentenced to 6 life terms in prison, 3 consecutive and 3 concurrent. Her first opportunity for parole won't come until April 2064, when she'll be 89 years old. She will spend the rest of her natural life behind bars, which is exactly what she deserves. Even though Megan confessed and is now serving her sentence, there are still questions about this case that may never be answered. The biggest question is whether there are more victims. Megan's admission that she lost count and her belief that there might have been 8 or 9 babies in the garage when only 7 were found suggests the possibility of additional murders. Where are those other babies? Did she dispose of them in different locations? Was her final pregnancy in 2011, the one she claimed ended in miscarriage with no medical records to prove it, actually another murder? Are there other burial sites that we'll never know about because Megan's memory is too damaged by years of drug use to remember what she did? Another question that haunts investigators is how Darren could have been completely unaware of what was happening. Yes, he was severely addicted to methamphetamine, and yes, addiction can impair judgment and awareness. But how do you live in a house where your wife is regularly giving birth and murdering babies without noticing something is wrong? Some people believe Darren had to have known something. Others argue that Megan's skill at concealing pregnancies, combined with Darren's addiction and criminal activities, created the perfect storm of circumstances that allowed these crimes to go undetected. The truth is, we may never know exactly how much Darren knew, or when he knew it. What we do know is that when he found that first box in the garage, he did the right thing by calling police. Today, Megan Huntsman sits in a cell at Utah State Prison, serving 6 life sentences for murdering 6 of her newborn children. Her surviving daughters have had to rebuild their lives knowing that their mother is a serial killer who murdered their siblings. Darren West has had to live with the knowledge that the woman he loved and married was capable of unthinkable evil, and that these crimes happened in his home while he was too consumed with addiction to protect his children. The Pleasant Grove community has had to grapple with the reality that one of their neighbors was committing serial infanticide for over a decade without anyone knowing. And 6 babies, 6 innocent children who never got the chance to take their first breath of free air, never got to experience life, love, joy, or any of the things that make existence meaningful, were murdered by the very person who should have loved them most. This case stands as one of the most disturbing examples of serial infanticide in American criminal history. It's a reminder that the most horrific crimes can happen anywhere, committed by people who seem normal on the surface. It's also a reminder of how addiction can destroy not just the lives of those who use drugs, but everyone around them, including innocent children who never asked to be born into such chaos. But most importantly, it's a reminder that we need to pay attention to the people around us. We need to watch for signs of trouble, offer help when we can, and never assume that everything is okay just because it looks okay from the outside. Because sometimes, behind the facade of normalcy, unspeakable horrors are taking place, And it's only when someone finally looks closer, when someone opens that carefully wrapped box in the garage, that the truth finally comes to light. The 6 babies Megan Huntsman murdered will never be forgotten. Their brief lives serve as a reminder of the preciousness of life and the obligation we all have to protect the most vulnerable among us. And their deaths serve as a warning about what can happen when addiction, mental illness, and evil converge in the most horrifying way possible. Let me know your thoughts about this absolutely shocking case in the comments. What do you think about Megan's claim that she lost count of how many babies she killed? Do you think there could be more victims out there that were never found? And how is it possible that someone could live in a house where such horrors were taking place without knowing what was happening? While you're thinking about that, make sure you subscribe to Grim Reality for more deep dives into the cases that shock us, disturb us, and remind us that sometimes reality is far more horrifying than any fiction we could imagine.